On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews
TV, theater, and film star Thomas Sadoski. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews. I'm Laura Heywood, and today's show is going to be a fascinating exercise for me. Here's why. My guest, Thomas Sadoski, is one of my favorite actors. I'm such a big fan of his professionally and personally, and he's just an incredibly nice guy. We could very easily sit here and talk about his passion for his work and his dog and his kid. We're friends in real life, and we've done this. But the project he's working on right now is just incredibly deep and important and scary and frank. And there's part of me that wants to go straight up NPR journalist for this interview and keep it serious so we don't make light of the subject matter. But I'm hoping that we're going to hit a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. This is a guy who has a lot to say, and I'm thrilled he's here to say it. You might recognize Thomas Sadoski as Don Kiefer on HBO's The Newsroom or as Matt Short on CBS's Life in Pieces. You might know him from the New York stage, including his Tony-nominated role in Neil LaBute's Reason to Be Pretty and his Obie and Lortel-winning turn in John Robin Bates's Other Desert Cities. He's also a fierce advocate for important causes related to immigration and human rights, including INARA, the International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance, and War Child USA, which provides resources for children and families affected by war. He's currently starring in Pulitzer Prize winner Suzan-Lori Parks' incredible new play, White Noise, at the Public Theater. Here's an introduction to the play by Suzan-Lori and the production's director, Oscar Eustis.
White Noise is about four friends, two interracial couples who have been friends from college, are now about 10 years out in the world.
What happens to one of the friends, Leo, the black guy, is one night he gets roughed up by the cops. This racially motivated incident with the cops is so upsetting to him that he chooses to take some radical action. And we watch how that affects the friendship of these four close friends.
Radical action is right. Thomas Sadoski, you play one of those four friends. First of all, welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
And secondly, tell us about your character in White Noise. This is a 3-hour-long production. It didn't feel too long in any way, but a lot happens, and it's very intense.
Yeah, we pack a lot into that time. I personally think we're the best ticket in New York.
I think so too, and it's hard to get.
You're getting a lot of bang for your buck when you come see our show. It's a pretty extraordinary thing to be a part of. Who is Ralph? That's a good question. I mean, I think that I play this character in this play who. White guy, obviously.
It would be a very different play.
It'd certainly be a very different world. Who agrees to go on this experimental journey with his best friend because his best friend is desperately in need of help. And what ends up happening to the two of them is they start to uncover and unpack some very, very serious, very deep, very painfully honest truths about each other and society that they live in over the course of the play.
These are two men who have known each other forever. They're roommates and teammates on the bowling team in college. And they clearly have had a lot of fun together, and they've lived more or less in the same world because they've spent all this time together. They're best friends, and yet their reactions to the world around them are so distinctly different, and yet totally intertwined. The way that they see the world in some ways as mirror images. Some ways as opposites.
Well, I mean, I think that it just in a nutshell is the black and white experience in this country. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And these two characters desperately love each other, but they do live in two separate realities. And throughout the course of the play, we're coming to terms with that. You know, we're coming to terms with the need to understand that and what it takes to understand that and what you have to be willing to know about yourself, learn about yourself to understand that, and how we go about processing that fact. In 2019, I mean, we're talking about, our original national sin and how it has
slavery.
And how it has, continue to stay with us here even into 2019, 2018, all this time that we thought People were thinking that we have come so far, but we're
Quote
not.
unquote post-racial society.
Yeah, what a ridiculous thing to say.
I know. This is what Oscar Eustis had to say.
At this moment in America, race is confusing and real and powerful, and the way it impacts the lives of these four people is just extraordinary.
I feel like that could also be said about every audience member who comes through.
If you come to see our show and are willing to witness our show in good faith, yes, absolutely. I see on a nightly basis people who are not willing, who are completely unwilling to have this discussion, and they lock down. And I think,
In what way? They're like, that's not me.
well, yeah, there is very much that's not me sort of thing. But also what ends up happening a lot with our show is people say like, well, that could never happen. And they just immediately turn off any possibility of having any discussion surrounding this topic. And
The topic being race in America and how
Yeah.
black people and white people experience the world differently.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that, there's a lot of, here we are in 2019, and I think a lot of and let's, first of all, let's just like be very clear. We are two white people having a discussion about race in America.
And I
right?
actually, I want to say for the record that both Suzan-Lori Parks, the playwright, and Daveed Diggs, who's the other star of the show, were invited, and just their schedules didn't work out.
Yep.
I almost postponed just because I was like, do we have any, I don't want to say any right, because like freedom of speech, but like we can talk about whatever we want, but we are both talking from the white experience, and no matter how hard we can try to empathize and to understand and to provide a platform, or to use our platforms to spread the voices of people of color, neither of us can speak from a first person perspective.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't try.
Right.
First and foremost, we shouldn't try. I think that we as white Americans can absolutely have a discussion about race in this country, but what we have to do is we have to keep it on ourselves, and we have to discuss where our inability to come to terms with things and what the open nerves are within the white experience are. We have to talk in those terms. We can't, there's no appropriation that can happen here. There's no, we can certainly, as feeling people and as intelligent people, empathize and imagine, but we cannot for a second think or believe that we have any sort of clue as to what the experience of being a person of color is in this country. We just can't. So if we are willing to, I think, and I could be totally wrong here. I mean, I'm willing to be profoundly wrong, and I am willing to be told so, and I'm willing to learn and go on that journey. But I think that as long as we are willing to have a discussion in which we are very clear and open and honest from the very beginning, that our experience or the discussion that we're going to have is going to be limited, is going to be partial, you know what I mean? It is going to be incomplete, utterly and completely incomplete, which in and of itself has been the issue for 200 plus years, that the narrative of this country has consistently been incomplete because we don't actually include the voices and the experiences of other people, particularly people of color.
Well, Suzan-Lori Parks and Daveed Diggs and, anybody else involved in the production, I have made it a point
anybody else, period.
No, what I was going to say is they have an open invite to come on this show. Like I really am trying hard to bring people on who have different perspectives from my own, because I know that if I'm sitting here having a one-on-one conversation with someone, then half of the people, 50% of the people in this room are going to be straightish white people, and that's already too much. You know what I mean? Sure. So it's important to me to provide a spectrum of voices.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fact that we're talking about this play is one reason that I was especially because, okay, so here, I don't know how much we're allowed to talk about the plot of the play. I feel like there's this, we don't want to do, we don't want to spoil the play for people who are going to see it.
Right.
At the same time, the play is only running for less than another month. It was extended through May 5th. Tickets are sold out. There's a lottery, and there's always, the chance of cancellations. But I don't know how many people are actually going to be able to see it. As opposed to
we definitely have some tickets available towards the end of the month and definitely in May. You know what I mean?
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
I want to be able to talk about it freely for people who aren't going to be able to see it. So I feel like that's another fine line.
We're going to be doing a lot of tightrope walking today.
Yeah, exactly. And I like
trust you.
that. It's exercise, right?
It is.
And I think that people lean away from discomfort without realizing that leaning into discomfort sometimes and finding that tension is how growth happens. And sometimes sometimes maybe you fall over the edge a little bit, but then it's like a pendulum. For example, I had Ty Defoe in recently, who's a non-binary actor, who's of Native descent.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I said was, I'm really afraid that I'm going to get some terminology wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Less about gender pronouns, because I have more practice with that,
Mm-hmm.
but specifically about, like, I didn't know whether there was a difference between saying First Peoples or Native or Indigenous, and
Right.
maybe one of those is more appropriate than another. And so he and I made an agreement right at the top that I was going to lean in with curiosity and with good intentions to allow him to correct me when necessary, if he would allow me the freedom to get it wrong from a point of view of integrity, like from a place of integrity and curiosity. And he was so down for it. And I was really excited because, like you, I try to be really willing to be wrong and have my mind changed or to have my course corrected, because I really just want to be a good person. And that can mean, if I'm getting better, that means that I have had room for improvement.
Sure, totally. And, I think that there's something that is happening and has happened over the last few years, which I think is genuinely a beautiful, powerful thing. And that is this idea that white people are being asked to check their privilege. I think that is incredibly important. I think that there is a misnomer amongst a lot of people, a lot of white folks, that being asked to check your privilege comes along with shame, or should come along with shame. And I don't know, I personally have never witnessed anybody asking me to feel bad. But what I'm being asked is to be honest. Just to be honest. Be real. Really just stop. Acknowledge the fact that because of the nature, the circumstances of your birth, you are afforded a certain degree of privilege and freedom in what seem like insignificant day-to-day moments that is not given to other people.
Yeah. I think
that makes just day-to-day existence different for you than it does other people. And nobody's asking you to feel guilty. Nobody's asking you to feel ashamed. Nobody's asking you to self-flagellate about that. But simply owning that just by itself starts to make space. And what has been my experience is that what people are asking of me as an individual, but are asking of me, particularly as a straight white male, is just make space.
Yeah.
Make space within yourself for the experiences of other people. Trust the experiences of other people. When people tell you that they are having this experience, believe them. You know what I mean?
You'd think that would be the easiest thing in the world. I see a lot of people who get they really object to the word privilege because they associate it with wealth. And they're like, my life was hard. I grew up poor. Stop telling me that I'm privileged as if it's about growing up in a mansion and never having any problems.
Right.
I think that it's a word that is, I think some people hear as like a positive thing, as opposed to a willingness to acknowledge a negative that we have never been
in a
exposed
nutshell.
to.
Here is privilege for me, right? And it sort of relates to our play. It relates to the play we're talking about. I grew up working class kid, didn't come from a lot of money, grew up in sort of rural Texas, rural-ish Texas, not a particularly big town. And I raised a lot of hell when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't like the most well-behaved sort of perfect citizen in my little small Texas community. I was a kid who was into punk rock, and, you know, I smoked a lot of pot and, you know, drank underage and did all of that sort of stuff. So
You
I
raged against the machine,
I
too.
did
I heard you
indeed.
got kicked out of your high school theater department.
I did. I got kicked out of a lot of stuff. But I had not infrequent run-ins with the law.
Mm-hmm.
Never once was my life in jeopardy, nor did I ever feel like my life was in jeopardy when I would have those run-ins and those experiences with the police. My future could have potentially been in jeopardy, you know what I mean, legally, but my actual life was never in jeopardy. And that is not the experience that my friends who are black and brown when I was growing up had.
Yeah.
And it's not the experience that people have today. And, you know, here, however many decades later. And that is real. And that, you know, that in a nutshell, like acknowledging that truth, that is acknowledging privilege. That my life, no cop ever came up to my car with his hand on his gun or his gun drawn.
Yep, mine neither.
And that's real.
I think people go like, yeah, well, that's normal. That's how it is.
No, that's not normal.
Well, right, exactly.
That's not normal.
We literally live in different universes.
Yes. It's not normal that things should be that drastic. And here's the thing. It is completely normal for folks who don't look like us.
To have a cop stop. I know.
Absolutely. And acknowledging the vast gulf between those two realities is absolutely about checking privilege, owning privilege, and just the acknowledgement of that already starts to make space.
All right, so let's get back to the play. What's so curious about this line of questioning or this line of conversation is that your character, Ralph, doesn't understand any of this.
Right.
If you told him, like, how would Ralph react if you were like, dude, check your privilege?
Oh, he would. I mean, he in fact I think does get pretty much called out in that way in the play, and his response is just he doesn't even say anything. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are you talking about? We're best friends. You know, you don't actually even understand who I am or where I come from. He has this sort of exact same response that you had mentioned earlier, where it's like, you know, my life was difficult. What are you talking about? I didn't come from privilege. And in as much as that is true for Ralph, it refuses to acknowledge the overall big thing, you know, that folks miss when they lock down like that.
Well, David's character is not only dealing with the reality of his own situation, where, as Suzan-Lori mentioned in the audio clip I played, he has a run-in with the police that gets violent, that is race-based, and dealing with just being a black man in America now. But he's also dealing with a deep-seated sort of ancestral trauma of having been the descendant of slaves. Mm-hmm. And he is tackling the idea of perhaps this is something that he'd never addressed in his own psychological digging of his own character. And he's one of the first things we learn about that character is that he's an insomniac. And he has the idea for an experiment that he thinks might cure him of both his insomnia and his, ancestral pain. And it involves bringing in Ralph, your character, who I think my favorite thing about the play is how it begins as a game and it becomes, it's like you play the characters in the game too well and Ralph becomes, I don't know the word to use. It's heartbreaking, and I had a hard time even clapping at the end of the show. I think that I like to say that there's a step beyond a standing ovation, and that is sitting in silence, where I as an audience member could not feel the same kind of joyous celebration at the end of the production that I would after, say, seeing Tootsie on Broadway, which I saw this weekend and is fantastic. And I just like, I love it. It's all the glitter and sparkle and tap dancing, and it's so funny.
Right.
And this one, I was like, oh, fuck, our world sucks.
Yes, a 3-hour exploration of race in America is a little bit different than Tootsie.
Right. I mean, Tootsie is a nice. Tootsie has some sociological.
Has quite a bit to say.
And I will say, just while we're on the subject, as a little sidebar, it has been updated in a really important ways, although small. Like it talks about the idea of, if a man dressing up like a woman to get work is taking a job away from a woman when it's harder for women to get work,
Right.
and that he's going to have to take a pay cut, because women get paid less than that. So that is an updated story, and it does have something to say about gender and the role of being a woman in the world, and, literally walking in somebody else's shoes. So I in no way was trying to say that Tootsie in particular, isn't aware enough or whatever.
Sure.
Nobody loves a show like that more than me. I will say that more and more I am attracted to works of theater that challenge me, and that me coming out of a theater and going, that is an important, challenging work, is a bigger compliment than that's going to win the Tony. Or,
Right.
I can't wait to download the album. Both of those things are true.
Absolutely.
But I want to see things that make me take a look in the mirror and go, oh shit, maybe I have some room to change too.
Well, that's why we make art. That's why we as a species make art. We make art to challenge ourselves, as artist and audience, to grow. We make art in order to hand the human experience off to each other in a different way, in a way that may not be like anything you've ever seen before, and precisely for that point, because it might not be like anything you've ever seen before. And if it's not like anything you've ever seen before and works its way in, there's this sort of old saying in recovery communities that if the person is willing, it doesn't matter what you say, they'll be willing to hear it. They'll hear it, But if they're unwilling, if they're not ready, you can say everything and they're not going to get it. It's all about the time, and it's all about the person. So if you are capable and ready to open yourself to art and to hear and to experience what it has to say and what it is giving you, then art hits you from a million different directions, right? And even like you said, Tootsie can challenge you. Mm-hmm. And should challenge you on some level if you are willing to be open to that. And if you're not, you're not. And that's sort of unfortunate for you. If you're
people
not.
Can watch a show, any show, I think, on any number of different levels. I went to see another off-Broadway play that tackles the idea of women in the workplace called Do You Feel Anger? And it's written in an absurdist style. And I saw some comments on social media that were like, nobody ever talks like that. This is an insult, And I was like, oh, look, straight white men talking about how women should be offended by the fact that women don't really talk like that in real life. And I'm like, I wasn't offended by it. I felt seen. I felt understood for the first time. And I kind of got into it with this dude on Twitter who kept telling me that I should be offended by something that felt like it was the first time that actually truly reflected my experience in the world.
Yep. There's nothing quite like that sort of privilege.
Well, that's Ralph. And so my question
Yes.
for you as an actor is, you can't go in and be like, this dude is closed-minded, and you have to be the hero of your own story, right? Nobody playing a villain goes in and is like, haha, I'm the cartoon bad guy. Every villain thinks they're the
Yeah, people do play stuff that way.
Well,
and it
but not good actors.
Right.
I mean, and maybe only in cartoons.
Right.
But I believe that Ralph really thinks he's the hero of his own story.
Yeah, and so does Ralph. Ralph absolutely believes that what he is doing in this moment is helping his friend.
So how do you, who obviously has a very strong concept of your own privilege as a straight white man, how do you empathize with Ralph so that you can actually be real in the moment playing those beats?
Well, it's just a matter of understanding. that comes from Suzan-Lori. You know, like she has written this play with 4 parts, and she's been very clear from the very beginning that she loves all 4 of these people and understands all 4 of these people and can make a coherent argument for all 4 of these people as to why they're doing what they're doing. And she wasn't ready to finish writing this play and put it up on its feet until she felt like she could make that argument for each one of these 4 people.
Here. I want to ask her what she loves about Ralph, because I will say he's cute. But other than that,
bless his heart.
I'm like,
yeah.
No, I don't even mean cute like that. I mean, I was flirting with you when I said that. I just mean like, I don't like him.
Yeah, I get it. I don't get to have that. I don't get the luxury of having judgment over Ralph yet.
But you judge people like him. You just were talking about it when you were like,
sure.
these people need to check their privilege or whatever.
But that's not a judgment. And see, and here's the thing. And again, this is like going back to sort of what I said earlier. Asking people to check their privilege isn't a judgment. It's not me saying that I'm better than you, or that you're lower or worse, or that you are defective or deficient. You
don't think that people who don't acknowledge their privilege are deficient in some way?
I think that they are. I don't think that they're deficient in some way. I think they are unaware. Sometimes maybe purposefully. And if that's the case, that is an issue that person needs to take up with themselves. But I think that the nature of this culture and the nature of this system that we face is that we are not taught. I was never taught growing up, going to the schools that I went to, that my experience was different from the experience of other people, that other people, the indigenous members of our community, the Native American members of my community, came from a history of literal genocide.
Yeah.
Literal genocide. It was talked about that, there was the Indian Wars and the Plains tribes, and then there was the Trail of Tears, and then, Little Bighorn, and people just sort of like, it was frankly whitewashed. Same happened with the discussion of slavery and the Civil War. All of a sudden it turned into a discussion about big battles between two, armies that were predominantly white over the, over the bringing together or the keeping together of the Union. And in as much as that was something that was a part of it, the reality is there was so much more happening. When you actually start looking into the history of the 1850s, the 1860s, when you actually delve into what John Brown was doing, when you actually read what Henry Beecher was doing out in Brooklyn, you know what I mean, and where Harriet Beecher Stowe, his sister's Uncle Tom's Cabin, came from and what it did and how it impacted society. When you actually start getting into this stuff, you realize that this was a tinderbox of race and race discussion, and nobody really talks about that.
I know, and it kind of makes me want to throw up. And
we weren't taught it, so that's why I say that people who aren't able or aware of their privilege are not necessarily deficient as much as they have been let down by an educational system, by a culture that has refused to take responsibility and to take ownership and to check itself. And so I don't want to make that sort of judgment. I think that making that sort of judgment, carrying that sort of judgment is what got us Donald Trump. You spend enough time making people feel bad for who they are, and this cuts both ways. Right? You spend enough time making people feel bad for who they are, they're going to get resentful.
Yeah.
That is true regardless of skin color, sexual orientation. that has what that does to people psychologically, psycho-emotionally, and certainly what it has done, over the course of centuries, is something that we really need to be able to look at. So I don't want to start off by calling anybody deficient, putting anybody at a lower plane, or making someone feel shame.
Yeah.
What I want is for people to know that being asked to check your privilege and to look at your privilege is a request to be honest, a request to own a universal truth, because if we can't own a universal truth, we can't have an honest discussion. And we need to have a discussion, because that discussion, that conversation takes place between people. And there are voices that need to be heard, deserve to be heard, should be heard, that have not historically been heard. And this idea that, being asked to make space is somehow taking something away from you is something that comes from a historical failing.
I just want everybody to love each other. I just want everyone to just be nice to each other and be generous with each other. Like, I think this conversations are so important, and yet they still, sometimes I feel like the more I try to engage in them, like the more accurately I'm seeing the world, and not always in a good way. And I'm like, oh, we're so blind to so many problems, and there's so much to be fixed, and it feels helpless, and it's scary, and like, what are we even doing on this planet? And it's easy, I think, to lose hope when we make ourselves aware to how much is still it's like how much improvement we need to make.
Yeah, how far we need to go. Maybe this will help, and this is something that sort of, for whatever reason, works for me. That you can't actually solve a problem until you acknowledge that it is there.
Agreed.
And so by the sheer fact that you are willing to acknowledge that these things exist, you are taking the first step in making progress within yourself and within other people, right?
So,
within a society.
Having to spend sometimes 6 hours a day in this character's skin and heart and mind, how do you bring joy back into your life and not just be like, ugh?
There's a lot of love in what I do, and I am fortunate enough to work with a tremendous group of people. We make that space for each other, and we take care of each other. And then also, I am fortunate enough to have a lot of love in my life. I have
You have the world's cutest kid.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome, and like that incredible little 2-year-old, like she is the soul salve for me. You know what I mean? Like that really does an extraordinary thing.
Can you just bring her to the theater and like after the show when everyone's in that
sort of place?
Like
she just, I know,
just like maybe just get a bunch of puppies, just something that's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Throw the confusion to the side and let us just all feel visceral love for a second.
We have to, we each take care of ourselves in our own way, and we have to. And like I'm fortunate enough to have a really loving, supportive family, and yeah, it's not comfortable or fun to be sitting in that character for 6 hours a day, but on the 2 show days, but it's my job.
Do you ever worry that you're going to like Daniel Day-Lewis it and like lose yourself in him?
No.
You answered that so fast. Like it sounds like you've thought about that.
It was something that I, from the very beginning of my training, when I first started this acting thing, when I decided that I wanted to be an actor, I had, when I first fell in love, I had this tremendous teacher down in my little town in Texas, and her name was Jo Spiller. And Jo was somebody who, from the very beginning, was very clear with me that we are pulling things from, we are pulling feelings, we are pulling experiences from our own well,
as opposed to imitating
but we are not the people that we play, you know, and that is an important distinction for an actor to make.
I feel like I hear actors say the opposite a lot. Like, I become that character.
Yeah, no, I think that's bullshit. First of all, I think that's self-indulgent bullshit.
Wow.
Nobody's paying to watch me go through therapy. You know, there are not 300 people that are paying a ticket price to come in and watch me work through my daddy issues on stage. There are 300.
I might pay to watch that.
Okay, but then like I'll do that in a solo show.
Yeah, right. I know.
Called Tommy and his daddy issues or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, but like that's what I have been asked to do is perform a part as written by Suzan-Lori Parks, and Suzan-Lori Parks didn't write Tommy Sadoski. Suzan-Lori Parks wrote Ralph Schildkritter. Now, if I have some feelings that if I am able to identify the same responses, guilt, shame, remorse, anger, fear, frustration, lust, all of those, and obviously as a human being, I can identify with those feelings that this character has, so I can pull from my own personal experience, but I don't become Ralph Schildkritter. I don't become the characters that I play. I didn't become Don Kiefer. I don't become Matt Short. I don't become these people because, first of all, that's impossible. That would actually be psychotic. And two, it's not about me. It's not about me. My art is not about me. My art form is not about me. I am a member of a collaborative team that is bringing to life something that, under the best of circumstances, holds a crystal clear mirror up to 300 people in that audience every night and forces them, whether they want to or not, to take a long look in that mirror and choose whether or not they want to see themselves reflected back. That is my job.
I feel like that's such a critical difference between theater actors and Hollywood actors is like, I think for a lot of Hollywood personalities, their job is about them.
Well, you just said it. There's a difference between actors and personalities.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think our society has become sort of used to personalities being hired rather than artists being hired.
I think that's I see a lot of that.
And you know that I don't really have time or energy for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually teach workshops to individuals and to school groups and stuff, mostly with people who want to become performers. And I tell them to eliminate the word brand and branding from their vocabulary, because I think that what's important is identity. It's like who you truly are. And when I teach social media, I'm like, we're going to create a recognizable, true version of you, so that when a part comes along that you're the only person who can do it, they'll know you're the only person who can do it, rather than try to mold you into something that, like, I like to say that branding is for when you have two identical styrofoam balls and you want one to sell better than the other. Neither actually has a purpose in life, but if you brand it correctly, you might be able to fool somebody.
Yeah.
But it's like, know your identity and know your and practice your craft.
Well, let's be really clear. Branding is manipulation.
Yeah.
Right? Branding is manipulation.
Right. Whereas identity is authenticity.
Is authenticity. And, you know, what you want as an artist is the freedom to move between roles. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Between human beings. I don't want a brand, because if I get branded, that means this is the box that I have been put in as an artist, and I have to work extra hard to quote unquote break out of that box and do something else. And then it becomes all about breaking out of a box. And I don't want any of that to begin with. I want the freedom to bounce around and become different people into occupy different spaces and try out different things.
Yeah, you did an interview recently with my old friend Sarah Benincasa,
Yeah.
where she said that she had a friend who like refused to believe that the guy who played Matt Short on Life in Pieces was the same guy who played Don
Kiefer, yeah.
on The Newsroom, because you presented so differently in both of them that it had to have been two different actors. And I imagine that's like the best compliment that you could get.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But, again, that also comes from me, I think, on some level, rejecting this idea that has been handed to artists recently. I think it started with my generation, unfortunately, and it is deeply ingrained, unfortunately, in this younger generation coming up behind us that, like, you have to have a brand. You have to have and, like, that's just... It's so destructive.
That's one of the reasons that when I started this radio show, I called it Laura Heywood Interviews, because I have a brand. I have a great brand, quote unquote. Broadway Girl NYC is Broadway's biggest fan. The CBS This Morning called me the most influential fan on Broadway. And I had so many people saying, when you're ready to do a podcast or a radio show or to expand beyond the social sphere, you better brand it as Broadway Girl, because it'll be easier to market. Your demographics are really clear. You can sell lots of ads. And I was like, but there's so much more to me than that.
Yeah, man, in your intro, you're talking to Joe Montana.
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
There's a reason I play that intro every time. It's yes, I can talk to Tony Robbins.
We contain vast multitudes.
Yeah.
We contain vast multitudes as human beings. Right?
Maybe that's what I should have called the show. Vast Multitudes.
Right.
With Laura Heywood.
And sort of like going back to the original discussion that we've been having, like that's what it is. Make room for people to express their vast multitudes.
So what is something you feel like got lost in the publicity of like Thomas Sadoski, the brand? You're an actor. Mm-hmm. You're an advocate and an activist, and you're a husband and a father. Mm-hmm. What do you think something is that would surprise people about you?
I genuinely don't know. I don't know, because I think that I have avoided so meticulously any sort of limitation in terms of brand or thing like that. I think that in some ways maybe to some sort of hindrance to my, sort of broader audience, potentially in like maybe social media land or something. I think I genuinely don't know, because I'm pretty much an open book. Like I refuse to not be who I am at any given moment.
I wanted you to be like, I'm an archery champion.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for better or for worse, you know what I mean? I refuse to, like, I have good days, bad days, good moments, bad moments, and I am who I am. And like sometimes I respond to things and my wife is like, why do you do that? Like, why do you have to respond like that? Why do you have to, like, who cares what that person said? And I'm like, I did in that moment. So I chose to respond. And I don't necessarily need to do that. But I don't know that, I am who I am. I think that in some levels there are so many secrets, about who I am.
I wasn't trying to get you to
no,
go into secrets.
No, not at all. And like there are so many parts of myself that aren't really sort of out there for public consumption, or that I don't really talk about, because that's just also another part of the way that I am sort of resistant to this idea of what is expected of people in the public eye under the nouveau rules of society, that like you have to Kardashian yourself and like expose every single thing manicured. You have to, with great thought and lighting, good lighting, expose like every part of what's going on in your life, and that's just not the case.
Well, I will say that you have done an excellent job with your social media of using it to promote the causes that are important to you, which brings us to the final segment of the show, which we do just cause.
Just cause! Just cause! Just cause!
That's just a little play on words that I think, everybody should have a just cause or 2 or 20 in their life, that like, if we're not making the world a better place, then what are we doing? And while I do think it is required these days for performers to have a social media presence, yours has very few pictures of you on it, your Instagram, and it is mostly calls to action for the causes that you believe in.
Yeah, I thank you for frankly offering this kind of time on your show to even discuss these sort of things. I mean, I think I think it says a lot about who you are as a person.
It's like the literal least I could do.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised.
And it is tongue-in-cheek when I say, well, why do we talk about this just cause? Because it's like, why in the world is not everybody talking about how to make the world a better place all the time?
Yeah.
It's the opposite of just cause in the like CUZ, just cause kind of way. We talk about it because we have to, because we have a platform, because, you know, I'm sitting in a beautiful studio with a microphone with theoretically like millions of people who could listen to this and not using it to talk about like privilege and to shed light on important causes just feels like a waste.
Absolutely. And I frankly, that's exactly the same way that I feel about my social media, you know, is that if you're going to have a platform, and not that I've been given a particularly big one in my life, which is fine by me, frankly, on any number of levels, but you know, I certainly don't have like, you know, tens of millions of Instagram followers or tens of millions of Twitter followers.
Follow at Thomas _Sadoski.
But, you know, I occupy my own little space in the world. And in that little space, I want to do as much good as I possibly can do. I genuinely don't understand. You know, I see this phenomenon quite a bit amongst actors and people in the public eye, and it's the worst kind of disaster tourism. It's the worst kind of like self-reverential bullshit where you see these, more often than not, white celebrities or public figures visiting these places or these institutions, and they've got their arm around somebody and they're saying, you know, here I am in such and such place with such and such person. Aren't they suffering so badly? Can't you help them out? And like, my shit is, get out of the picture. What are you doing in the picture? You've now made that person, that living, breathing person that you're ostensibly there to help, into a prop. You've turned a human being into a fucking prop. And I don't have patience for that. That infuriates me to no end. There's a handful of actors who I won't name who do that stuff, but if you look at their Instagram or their social media stuff, and if you see them sitting there with their arm around somebody and saying, oh, this person is suffering so bad, you know, why don't you join me in helping them out? Unfollow. Because that person actually isn't there to help. That person is there for their brand. That person is there for themselves.
Do you think that there's like a middle ground Venn diagram in it? Like if somebody's like, if I take this picture, if I'm in the picture, then People magazine will publish it.
There's a very big difference between having an organization say to you, listen, can you please take a picture or do something with our logo or talk about our organization, and you know, saying, yeah, but this is where you as an individual have a responsibility in this situation, right? A lot of times these organizations, and I work with children's organizations and refugee organizations, a lot of times the people who are on the ground who are working are so caught up in helping, because they're not personalities. They're not, you know, public figures. They're the people who are actually on the ground dealing with these people. So they have these intimate relationships with these kids or their families in which they, you know, having a picture taken with them is like, this is my friend, or this is this kid who I've watched grow up from this horrible situation into the human being that they are now. So they're not thinking in terms of that sort of public exposure fully, because they occupy a different world. So, well, hold on.
No. I don't want to interrupt you.
And so you, as the person who is more present in the social sphere, in the public sphere, have the responsibility in that moment to say, I would be happy to take a picture with your aid workers. I would be happy to take a picture in front of a banner with your logo, but I don't want to turn this child or this person into a prop. And they will instantaneously understand that. They just sometimes, the weird thing that happens around celebrity and that sort of thing, it shuffles the board in a weird way that people sometimes just overlook and they forget. And so you have a responsibility in that moment to say, I want to help the people who are helping. So, yeah, I mean, and Amanda my wife is really great at this. She is really, really good. She does a lot of work with animal charities, and we both sit on the board of directors of Inara that you mentioned at the beginning of the show. And, we're more than happy to take photos with the War Child thing and the Inara thing, and with Arwa Damon, who founded Inara, and with Dr. Samantha Nutt, who founded War Child, and and the extraordinary workers, the people who are actually doing the work. Because unfortunately, People Magazine will run the picture, is much more likely to run the picture if we're there. But I'm not gonna go to a refugee camp in Jordan and take a selfie with a refugee kid. But here's the thing, a lot of people will.
Right.
And that disgusts me.
Who is the currency? Like, who gets the currency? Is this currency for the celebrity, or is this currency for the organization?
And the instant that line gets blurry, it's all fucked.
Yeah.
And that I absolutely refuse to have any part of.
Good for you.
I just, it turns my stomach in a way. And this comes from my grandma. Like, I was raised by this tremendous woman who, she's my hero. God bless her. She's up there, in the great NGO in the sky, doing amazing things for people. But my grandmother was a woman of tremendous humility, right? And she was a woman of tremendous compassion and tremendous generosity. And she instilled in me, not through lessons that she taught me, but just by the way she walked through the world, that my responsibility was to giving. My responsibility was not to being seen.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say I've ever done it perfectly, that I've done it perfectly. I have made mistakes. There are definitely times I look back on it.
Anyone who claims to be perfect is of no interest to me.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely times I look back on it and go, shit, like I probably should have done that differently, or I wish I hadn't included myself in that picture or whatever. But I am conscientious of it. And moving forward, I'm trying to do a better job of it. And it's certainly a message I'm trying to carry to my daughter.
I want to make sure that we do give a little more information about Inara and War Child, the two organizations that we've briefly mentioned. We are running out of time, unfortunately, but this is not something I want to skimp on.
Right.
Inara is the International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance, and War Child is an incredible cause that is all about providing everything from educational programs and safe spaces for children affected by war, to training for families so that they can then provide for themselves, to free legal counsel for girls and women who are rape survivors, and forced early marriage and abuse and neglect. And every time I see you, I feel like I learn about something that I could potentially help with, and these are organizations that just feel so incredibly important.
They are. They're tremendously important. Inara takes kids who are injured in war, particularly Syrian refugees, at this place, because it's a fledgling organization. It's just getting started, and it provides for them free, life-changing, and life-saving medical care. They take kids out of the refugee camps. They take kids out of Syria, and they take them into Beirut, and they give them free medical care to literally change their lives, save their lives.
We can contribute to inara.org.
INARA.org. Yep.
And War Child is www.warchildusa.org. Yeah. I am going to pledge right now to make a donation to both organizations on behalf of you and the work that they're doing, as a thank you for being on the show today. And I'm hoping that as Laura Heywood Interviews continues to grow, that that will just be part of the infrastructure of the show, that there will always be money that goes to the charity of choice of the guests that I have in studio. Because again, if I'm not helping make the world a better place, then I don't deserve to be here. And that's how I look at the world. We are just at the end of the show, but I want to thank you for listening. If you're listening to the free podcast, I want to remind you that you can actually listen live and get every episode a week early if you go to dnrstudios.com/Laura. It's $6.95 a month. It's less than a venti caramel macchiato or whatever at Starbucks once a month, and it does allow me to continue to do the show. You also get a ton of other content that comes along with it. You can see my interview archives at lauraheywoodmedia.com, and you can follow me on social media at BroadwayGirlNYC. Thomas Sadoski, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.